we're going to take a brief break here from talking about the 2014 election and look ahead a little bit to the 2016 election. And to introduce our speaker, I want to very briefly introduce Karen Getman. Karen has long and deep ties to IGS. She is, as many of you know, a partner at Remcho, Johansson and Purcell. In fact, a fair number of you in the room may have been represented by her at one time or another. And traditionally at this conference, these lunch sessions are co-sponsored by Remcho, Johansson and by Nielsen Merksimer. We have kind of a bipartisan law firm coming together to sponsor the lunch. And Karen is here to represent, I guess I can say both firms, and to introduce Amy. Karen's a partner at Remcho Johansson. As I said, she's a former chairman of the Fair Political Practices Commission. She was an executive in residence at IGS. She lectures at the Berkeley Law School and is a former member of the IGS National Advisory Council. So she's a longtime supporter of the Institute. We really deeply appreciate everything she has done for us, and we appreciate the sponsorship of Remcho Johansson and Nielsen Merksimer and all the other sponsors for this. So to introduce Amy, Karen Getman.
It's not exactly the first time I've been up here representing a Republican, but it's one of the maybe 3 times I've done that. And I want to say a word for Ethan and IGS and the panelists, because not only is this an interesting bipartisan event, and it's certainly my very favorite event that IGS puts on. I never miss one. It's an event in which you see a lot of political courage, and like you did in the last panel, where people come and they're very honest and they take the hits and they fight back, and that is just a real pleasure to see. It's one of the things I look forward to in this event. But I'm very excited because I'm a real fan of our speaker. I've been following her for years. Amy Walter is the national editor of the Cook Political Report, and I know that I read her weekly column every Friday, and I bet many of the people in this room do as well. She joined the Cook Political Report after a stint as the political director at ABC News, and before ABC, she was editor-in-chief of National Journal's The Hotline, where she provided regular analysis of the national political environment in the weekly National Journal column called On the Trail. This is Amy's second tour with the Cook Political Report. From '97 to 2007, she served as a senior editor for the Cook Report covering the U.S. House. Amy's a regular panelist on Washington Week with Gwen Ifill, which I know I'm one of those nerds who watches every week. And she was a member of the CNN Emmy Award-winning election night team in 2006. In the fall of 2013, she served as a fellow at the University of Chicago's Institute of Politics. Amy was one of DC's top 50 top journalists, named that by Washington Magazine in 2009. And she won the Washington Post Crystal Ball Award for her spot-on election predictions in 2000. So I know what I want her to predict for 2016. We'll see if she does it. She's a member of the Board of Trustees at Colby College, where she graduated summa cum laude. And welcome to the warmer end of the spectrum. Thank you very much, Amy.
Thank you. It is a lot warmer. It is 29 degrees at home, so I may have to miss my flight tomorrow to do that. Thank you for having me. I've had a really excellent time here. I was here all day yesterday trying to soak up as much information as I could about California politics. And it is true, those of us on the East Coast, we do give short shrift to our friends here on the left coast. I'm trying to do more of it. You guys just have to give us some more competitive elections. So here's to a competitive Senate race, please. Let us have an excuse to come out here, right? All right, so 2016, we are only 647 days away. So you better get ready for it to come at you. It's gonna come very quickly. Here's what I was gonna do. I'm just gonna give a very 30,000-foot overlook of what I see going on in terms of what's shaping up for 2016, and then open it up for you all for questions. And I know you guys are really shy, so it's going to be hard. Your commentary as well, if you'd like to do that, sure. But we can engage then a little bit as to what we're seeing specifically about 2016. Look, the way it seems to be shaping up right now is sort of this epic clash between demography and history. And by demography, I think it's become pretty clear over the last few cycles that we seem to have these boom busts every 2 years, right? So in a midterm election, what we know about the turnout, what the electorate looks like, we're going to find out a lot more in the next panel. It is older, it is whiter, it is more male, less female in terms of turnout. And then in a presidential, turnout is much more diverse, and is also, you have females making up a bigger percent of the electorate, and it's younger, okay? Now, my colleague at the Cook Political Report, David Wasserman, came up with a great analogy for this, which he calls it the Cracker Barrel versus the Whole Foods division of the electorate, okay? If you think about, does anybody know what a Cracker Barrel is here? Okay, all right. I say that only because, and again, not to stereotype, but in audiences where we may be in a more urbane environment, people might not know much about Cracker Barrel, and my colleague was speaking in my neighborhood in Arlington about this, and a woman raised her hand and she said, I'm sorry, did you mean Crate and Barrel? I've never heard of a Cracker Barrel, which is just going to make my point here, right? So Cracker Barrels, if you've ever been to one, they are mostly found outside of urban areas. If you've ever been on a road trip, you're going to find them little bit off the beaten path. If you're inside the Beltway, for example, you'll find them outside the Beltway. If you're in the South, you find a lot of them, again, outside of the big urban areas. If you think about Whole Foods, where they're typically located, more urban, more diverse, younger, okay? So just think about the two types of people that are going to go to a Whole Foods and Cracker Barrel. What he did to take this a step further was he actually took all the county election data and overlaid the locations of Cracker Barrels and Whole Foods, okay? To come up with this, which is we can have a whole discussion later on about sort of we as voters, how we are self-sorting now more than ever. And where we live, eat, and work says as much about how we vote than anything else. But if you look in 1992, Bill Clinton carried 40% of the Cracker Barrel counties in America and about 61% of the Whole Foods counties. In 2012, it was 29% of the Cracker Barrel counties that Barack Obama carried, but he carried almost 80% of the Whole Food counties, okay? So again, think about the electorate as this. 2014, the election was a midterm election, and many of the most high-profile races were taking place in very red states that did not have a particularly high percent of minority population. Put all of the data together, you find it was, like it is traditionally, it was an older, whiter electorate and looked more Cracker Barrel. 2012 looked more Whole Foods in terms of the younger people who turned out, diversity of the vote that turned out. And it plays out at the Electoral College level too, and I think this is the most important thing to remember as you're thinking about how 2016 plays out demographically is the importance of the Electoral College, right? We just had a map in 2014 that was all about how important it was for Republicans to pick up states that had been trending Republican at the federal level, but Democrats still held on to at the state level, the Louisianas, Alaska, and Arkansas, and such. Now we're going to get to a different map, and the map that matters is the Electoral College map. Now, if you go back and you look since 1992, every single Democratic nominee for president has carried the same 18 states. This is win or lose, okay? This is John Kerry and Bill Clinton and Barack Obama and Al Gore. If you go and look at that same number of states on the Republican side, they've carried the same 13 states in every single election, win or lose. Now, there's something important to remember about this math-wise. First, I recognize 18 is bigger than 13, so that's important. The other important thing to remember is that the Electoral College, of course, is based on population size, not on the geographical size of your state. Republicans do really well in big states that have no people in them, okay? Like Wyoming, right? Awesome to win Wyoming every year. It's not going to get you a lot. And so when you add up the electoral votes of those 200, of those, well, see, I gave away my line, of those 18 states, where Democrats start is at 242 electoral votes, okay? So this is what every single candidate who's run for president since 1992 has started with that base. If you add up all those states that every Republican has carried, you end up with 102 electoral votes. Now, to be fair, and I play with this app a lot called 270towin.com. If anybody likes to manipulate this and is not very good at math, which is me, you don't have to add these numbers in your head. The computer will do it for you. It's fantastic. All right, so if you play with this app for a minute, this is what you recognize. If we're gonna start, we're not even talking about candidates, all right? I'm not gonna talk about candidates, I'm not gonna talk about primaries until I finish this discussion about the Electoral College, and this is the difficulty here for Republicans fundamentally, which is if we give every single one of those states, those 18 states, back to Democrats, okay? So now they're at 242. All I have to do in order for a Democrat to win the White House is click on New Mexico, which quite frankly has been trending more Democrat. I don't really think of that as a swing state anymore. It was at one point, but I think of it now as much more of a safely Democratic state. But click on New Mexico and click on Florida and it's done. There we go. There's 270 plus electoral votes. Or I can say, all right, forget it. I will give Florida to Republicans. Now I'm just going to click on Virginia, Colorado, and Nevada. There you go. Done. There's the Democrat has now been elected president with electoral college votes. If I do the same for Republicans, I'm going to be fair. I'm not going to give them 103 because remember, Bill Clinton in those days was winning places like Montana and Louisiana and Arkansas. That's never going to happen again, all right? So I now will give the Republicans with the base where they really start, which is 191, okay? So that gives them, you know, the Georgia, the Louisiana, the Kentucky, West Virginia, those states that had been going Democratic in the 1990s, but now that are pretty safely Republican. But you got to click on a lot of states before you get to 270 if you're a Republican. So you got to go Florida, Ohio, Virginia, North Carolina, Iowa before you get to 270. It's a lot of states, all right? And you got to do all of those states. They are very different demographics. And we know that the demographics has been the problem here for Republicans now for some time. When there's a Cracker Barrel electorate, Democrats do very poorly. They don't do particularly well among white older voters. In fact, if there was one group, the only group really that Mitt Romney did well with were voters who were white who are over the age of 45. There's nothing wrong, looking around this audience, myself included, with white people over the age of 45. You're all wonderful, talented people. Here's the problem. We are not a growing share of the population, right? So, like, spoiler alert here, America's not getting whiter, and old people eventually die, okay? So if your group that you're counting on to turn out and vote for you is 45 and older, eventually those people aren't going to be alive much longer, right? 25 and older, you got better odds that those people are going to be around a little bit longer than that. And, you know, if you look at where, and we don't need to rehash, everybody knows the story about what happened in 2012, how poorly Mitt Romney did with minorities, with women, with younger voters. Republicans are really stuck in, as Lindsey Graham has called it, a demographic death spiral, right? They got to find a way to be able to get out of it, or else I do not know how you win places like Virginia, North Carolina, Colorado, Nevada, Florida, if you're not doing better among younger, more diverse electorate. It's not possible to do those things. And it's not that if Republicans need to dominate these groups or even get a majority of the vote in these groups. The technical term is they need to not suck so badly among those groups, okay? So if you look at, George W. Bush did in 2004, he didn't win women, but he only lost them by 3 points and won men by about 10 or 11 points. He didn't win Latinos, but he carried about 43, 44% of the Latino vote. Same with the Asian vote, 44% there. So again, it's not about going from 27% to 55%. It's from going from 27 to 45. It's from going from 45, to 48, right? It's increments. So the question now for Republicans is, okay, who can break us out of this demographic death spiral or this ideological cul-de-sac that they're stuck in? And we kind of can pretty quickly eliminate a certain number of those who aren't going to be the ones to do this, okay? The folks who are right now running, I would argue, for the Iowa caucus type of voter. The Mike Huckabee, Rick Santorum, Ted Cruz, okay? Those aren't the kind of people that are going to expand the base of the Republican Party. And they're doing just fine right now, speaking to their audience, and we will see how well they do with that. But then there is actually a very deep bench of Republican candidates who I think can do the job there. The question, of course, is how they actually perform as a candidate. The other person that we knew who wasn't going to do that was Mitt Romney, who I am so, just for my own personal safety, was glad that he announced yesterday that he's not running, because I'd been saying, and actually I said this in front of a bunch of University of California students, there's a tremendous program that the University of California system runs in Washington. I was speaking to them, and they asked about Mitt Romney. I think this was in October or November of last year, and I was like, if Mitt Romney runs, I will eat my iPad. I swear, he is not running, okay? And then as all the stories started to come out, and I talked to people in the Romney camp about, well, he's serious, and I was like, maybe they make a gummy type of iPad, but I was still convinced he wasn't going to do it, and so thankfully, I do not have to eat this iPad in front of you all. But we also knew, like, beyond all of the other stories you're going to read about how he made his decision or how he didn't, look, we knew that this was not a guy who was going to be able to get out of that cul-de-sac. The self-deportation, the 47%, that wasn't going to go away. But you do have, as I said, another crop of candidates out there. So you look at somebody like Jeb Bush, the most talked about guy. It's obvious how he could expand this base for Republicans, not the least of which is the fact that he's from Florida. So that's a nice, good electoral college prize at 29 electoral votes. He's a fluent Spanish speaker. He's married to a Mexican-American woman. He's got a track record of pushing back against many in the Republican Party on their views on immigration. He has a record as an executive, as well as a business executive, as well as a political executive. He's got one just kind of minor problem, which is he's named Jeb Bush, right? And it's not just among Democrats. I mean, I know we were talking a lot about the legacy and how frustrated a lot of voters feel about this idea of having another Bush-Clinton matchup. But when you talk to Republicans, it's equally frustrating for them, the idea that there's going to be another Bush, that they too want a time for change kind of candidate. So his last name becomes a big problem. The other big problem for him, remember, he hasn't been on the ballot since 2002. A lot of things have changed in electoral politics since 2002, right? We didn't have Twitter. We didn't have everybody with a camera phone. We didn't have we had 24/7 news, but not at the metabolism that we do now. This is a very rusty candidate. And in the old days, you could take a rusty candidate and put them, in the political equivalent of the minor leagues, send them down to AA. They do some speeches on the rubber chicken circuit somewhere in Iowa, and nobody has to see it. Well, now all the reporters in this room are going to be wherever that is, in Podunk, wherever, with their cameras, and it'll be up on YouTube in 5 minutes. The next person you could argue could help could help Republicans expand their base, would be somebody like Chris Christie, right? Governor of a blue state, won over, as he liked to tell everybody in 2013, how well he did with minority voters in that state, how well he did with women voters. Chris Christie's problem, we can talk all about the personality and how does New Jersey translate in Iowa, but I just go back to the fundamental problem with Chris Christie. The base is not ambivalent about him. The base does not like him at all, okay? And when I say the base, if you look at the last couple of polls that have come out testing just how Republicans feel about the potential candidate. Right? One was in the exit polls at the 2014 election. Most recently, CBS had a poll asking, what do you think about fill in the blank as president? Do you think this person would be qualified? Would you like to see this person run? And in both of those cases, 45% of Republicans said they don't want him to run and they don't think he would be a good candidate. That is 45% of the people in your own party. I do not know how you change that perception, right? It's one thing when people don't know you and you're like, well, wait till they get to know me. They're going to really like me. And then they don't like you. Okay, that's fine. But when people say, I already don't like you, they're not usually open to hearing from you, okay? Because they've already made up their mind about you. So that is a big problem. Marco Rubio, again, he has a lot of the same attributes that Jeb Bush has. Florida, but, and obviously Spanish speaker. What he has that Jeb Bush doesn't have, he has a like story, classic American middle class, son of immigrant story. He is very good at speaking to that middle class anxiety in a way that I find very compelling. His bigger problem with voters, with the base, we hear a lot about, well, his vote on comprehensive immigration reform, people aren't going to like that. I think his bigger problem is the fact that he is a young, attractive, first-term senator whose only other real job in life was being a state legislator. I don't know, it sounds like somebody that people have been criticizing for not having, right. So that is going to be a struggle for him. Rick Perry has a good story to tell about Texas. The economy's doing well, and Texas governors, Republican governors, actually do quite well among Hispanic voters. If you remember where Rick Perry, when he really started to stumble, was before the oops thing, but it was when he defended his decision, and quite frankly, it was also the state legislature's decision to give in-state tuition to kids who were brought to this country legally. That was a very popular, not controversial thing in Texas. For Iowa Republicans, that was done, all right? They didn't want to hear much else about that. The other thing about Rick Perry and going to the oops moment, your mom always told you only get one chance to make a first impression. He made his first impression. He might be able to change it. He can work hard to do it. He is working very hard at it. But it is going to be a lot tougher for him to do that. So that really leaves us then with a couple of other candidates that I think are the ones that are the less talked about, although now suddenly are becoming talked about. But I've been writing about him for a while, which is somebody like Scott Walker from Wisconsin. Now, Wisconsin is not exactly the most demographically diverse state. Okay, unless it includes people wearing cheese hats. There are probably more of those per capita than anywhere else in the country. So he'll do very well among that demo. And that he's not exactly like a light the room on fire guy, okay? If Scott Walker was sitting in the back of this room, you would have no idea that he were here. Oh my God, he's here? Can't believe it. Thank you. Why don't you come up and tell us? But if you've been reelected 3 times in a state that also is Wisconsin, right? You have some political skills. Love him, hate him, whatever you think. He's incredibly polarizing, but he's found a way to win in that state. And he does it in a way where he doesn't come across as mean-spirited or ugly or any of those things. So you can certainly, if you're a Democrat, you can certainly try to demonize him on a whole bunch of issues, but he's not going to help live up to that caricature, just in his personality type. He checks a lot of boxes in a Republican primary. The establishment can like him, the Tea Party can like him, evangelicals like him. Remember, he's the son of a minister. He can talk very well and very openly about his faith. So I think he is somebody that is starting to move up in terms of this candidate for Republicans who, again, could win a primary, but you could also see breaking them out of just the sort of demographic slot that they've been stuck in. John Kasich is another guy that some people are talking about. Again, it's helpful to be a governor of a big, important swing state. And John Kasich talks a lot about economic issues in a way that would make you think he might actually be a Democrat, especially when it comes to issues like Medicaid funding, when it comes to working with the less advantaged. John Kasich's biggest problem, as one Republican has said to me, is this is a guy who can walk into a room of friends and leave with a room of enemies, okay? His personality is very difficult, and that doesn't wear well on the trail. So that's a pretty deep bench of candidates who I think at the very least could help move Republicans into a place where they're not stuck in that sort of Romney electoral college map. I don't know which one of those it's going to be. We can get to that during the Q&A, but that's the crop of characters right now. So if Republicans have a demographic map problem, Democrats, and let's just say it's Hillary Clinton, okay? That's who the nominee will be, so we'll just start with that. And we can get into that Q&A. Hillary Clinton's problem is as much about history as anything else, all right? And that is, you don't have to be a political scientist to know this, but there's some interesting history that I'll ask you about, which is, you know, the last time, all right, we'll start with this. So what is the last time that a two-term president was elected, okay, and succeeded a member of his own party? Right, George H.W., so 1988. And then can anyone name the time before that happened? So you have to go back to 1904 with Teddy Roosevelt, okay? Now, no, because he was, right? I want to say that you were elected right after, not that you died. But that's fair. We can maybe go there, but I'm going to go for elected, not that you got there through death and then were elected. All right. And Johnson Kennedy, but that wasn't two-term. He wasn't a two-term, yeah. Okay, now take Truman, FDR aside. When's the last time a Democrat, we're not gonna count for now the Truman Kennedy piece, a Democrat succeeded a two-term president, was elected to succeed a two-term president? Right. Okay, you can say FDR, who succeeded himself, which I don't totally count, but fine. Then you had to go back to Martin Van Buren, okay? So, there we go. Americans do not like to have the same party in power for 3 terms. It is just like it's just embedded in the American psyche. And George H.W. Bush was the last one. And part of it is a sense of giving the other side a try. And this is true in good times and in bad, all right? An unpopular incumbent, a popular incumbent, very hard to do. And this is where we start this election, which is, as I agreed, when I say start this election, 600 and whatever many days out from this election. And I think this is the most important number to watch. The president's approval rating, important. Views about the economy, important. But the time for change number, I think, is even more important. And the way that NBC asks this, where they say, do you want your next president to take the same or a different approach from this current president? And right now, this was in December, 71% of Americans say, we want a president who takes a different approach than Barack Obama, right? Which is pretty much the exact same number that you saw at this point in 2007 about George Bush, where people said, we want a change from George Bush. What's interesting is in about July of 1999, voters were actually more evenly divided on Bill Clinton, right? Bill Clinton was a lot more of a popular president. Times were good. Voters were really divided, 44% saying same direction, different direction. But by the time we got to the end of 1999, a majority of voters saying, I want to go in a different direction than the president. The opposite happened with George H.W. Bush, which was voters saying this was actually a differently worded question, so we don't have data going all the way back to 88. But basically, do you want a Democrat or a Republican as president? And early on, it was we want a Democrat. And by the time you got to the summer really, of 1988, people were saying, they like the idea of a Republican for president. So that's really the number that you're going to watch here. Now, theoretically, as the president's approval ratings go up, that time for change number may go down, right? But if it doesn't, that's going to be a very hard challenge for Hillary Clinton, because she's got to figure out how you're a change candidate under two things. One, you have a D after your name. Two, you were part of the Obama administration. And more important, you've been in Washington for the last 25 years, or been part of national politics for the last 25 years. You're not exactly change, right? Now, she's a female candidate. That part is change. But is that enough of a change when people are saying, we want a different direction? I don't know. Now, you can also argue, well, okay, but put her up against Jeb Bush, right? Who wins the change argument there, right? It's back to the future, everybody. Bush, Clinton. I don't know what year it is, but might as well. The only difference I will argue is that Jeb Bush is somebody that everybody thinks they know, but they really don't know, all right? For anybody here who is a younger sibling who followed an older sibling through school, you know this theory, right? You go into the class, let's say your older sibling was a terror. They meet you and they're like, oh, you're George's younger brother, great. And the teacher's thinking, oh my God, I got another one of these, right? So instantly you're pegged as, you're that kid's brother, you're that kid's sister. I already have an image in my mind of you. And that's where Jeb Bush starts off right now. But nobody knows who he is. If I went up to 100 people on the street and said, do you know who Jeb Bush is? Oh yeah, he's a Bush. Okay, do you know where he's from? Texas, or I don't know. What? Who is he? I mean, he's a brother or the son or something. He has a chance to redefine himself in a way that Hillary Clinton does not. Everybody knows Hillary Clinton, and views about Hillary Clinton aren't going to change. And whereas Jeb Bush has a story that he can tell if people allow him to tell it. I don't know if they are going to be open to that. They may just say, look, you're a Bush, I don't want to hear any more. So that's going to be the bigger challenge for him to do that. So who wins in this fight between history and demography? I don't know. That's why we have elections. That's what's fun about this, right? We get to see which of these candidates, somehow this is going to be upended. Somehow one of these things is going to no longer be a truism. Either Republicans are going to figure out how to break out of this and get an finally get out of this electoral trap they've been in, or Hillary Clinton, or they're not. And Hillary Clinton is either going to be able to break this long tradition of a country that is not willing to give one party 3 bites at the apple, or she's not. But see, we have campaigns for that very reason. So these guys are going to go out there, and gals are going to go out there, and we're going to watch them over the next 690 days, and we're going to have a whole lot of fun. I know I am. I find this like the most fascinating election that we've had in some time, in part because we've just never seen this early on this many candidates so engaged in the process. And so it also is really good for business. The more candidates, the more campaign action, the better it is for all of us. I think it's a lot more fun. And it's better for the voters, I think, too, to get a sense of who all these people are. So that is my very rough take on those two forces at work and the candidates at work. My job now is to see what you guys want to talk about or what you guys think about all of this. So I know we have the monitors wandering around with microphones. If you guys want to station yourselves, and then anybody who wants to bring up a point, ask a question, yes. Why don't we go right here? Yep, right in the front with the blue shirt.
Right.
Well, I wasn't going to say that. Decided not to get in too much trouble.
You're with the Cook Report. I'd like to hear your 2 or 3 minute recap of the U.S. Senate races in 2016. Supposedly,
in
there'll be a shift back.
2016.
Yes.
Yes. Good. Okay. Well, when I started in 2014, I would start a lot of my speeches by saying, look, no matter what happens in this election, it is very likely that it gets overturned in the next election. In other words, Republicans shouldn't feel too confident about the majority because there's a great likelihood that they lose it. Now, that was before Republicans didn't just pick up 6 seats, they picked up 9 seats, right? If they had just picked up a bare majority, and gotten just the 51 seats, it'd be a lot easier for me to say it's just going to flip the next time around. It's harder to say that now that they picked up so many of those seats. For this reason, if you look at the seats that Democrats have to defend, that Republicans defend in 2016, they are blue states. There's no doubt about that, right? And some are very blue states. Illinois, we talked about Wisconsin, we have New Hampshire, we have Pennsylvania. But those states are not as blue. Take Illinois out for a second. Those states are not as blue as Louisiana and Arkansas and Alaska were red. And it requires then Democrats to run the table on all of those states, even the ones that are slightly blue or maybe purplish, like in Ohio or New Hampshire. And Republicans do have good candidates in all of those states. Now, that didn't help Democrats, right? Mary Landrieu was considered one of the strongest candidates going into 2014, and she lost by a huge margin. Kay Hagan from North Carolina was considered one of the weakest candidates, and she barely lost. And you can really just tie it to, you just had to tie it to the presidential performance in all of those states. So if we just base it on presidential performance, then Wisconsin and Illinois and Pennsylvania, probably New Hampshire should all go. That also requires, though, that Democrats hold on to, not only pick up those seats, but they have to hold on to Nevada. I don't know, is Harry Reid going to run? Is he not going to run? And Colorado, which I think they hold on to Colorado much easier in a presidential than a non-presidential. But again, everything has to go right. So I think it's a very competitive Senate. I think Democrats definitely pick up seats. Do they pick up enough to get the majority? A lot of that is going to depend on the margins by which Democrats run up the Democrat at the top of the ticket. If that's Hillary Clinton, do in Ohio, New Hampshire, Pennsylvania, and other states like that. Yeah, sure. How about right there?
Amy, excuse me, how much of the fact that if she's elected, Hillary Clinton would be the first elected woman president.
Yeah.
How much of a factor do you think that might be in overcoming the continuity factor?
No, it's a very good question, and some of that comes down to how does she run, which was, there was a lot of criticism of her campaign in 2008 that she ran too much as an executive and as an insider, and she didn't talk enough about the fact that she was an outsider too. How did she let Barack Obama get the outsider time for change mantle when this would be historic as well? What made Barack Obama, though, very successful, and I think what works against Hillary Clinton, is that beyond the fact that Barack Obama was African American, is that nobody knew anything about him. He could be whatever you wanted him to be, right? He was going to be this or he was going to be that. So many voters just took this image that they had, whatever that was, and they put it onto him. And it fit easily because we didn't have any other story. We all know Hillary Clinton. Now, she can come out and she's going to maybe run a different campaign. She's going to emphasize things differently. That's all fine and well. But people are not ambivalent about her, and people know a lot about her. Now, some of it they know, and now maybe they don't put as much weight on as they once did, or maybe they thought this, but now think that. But it's just a lot harder when people already have an image about you to make it be about the first woman when it's Hillary Clinton versus a woman that we don't know much about, but she's running for president, and then it becomes much more about the woman piece. Yeah.
Yeah, hi.
Hi.
You painted a fairly rosy picture about the demographics favoring Democrats, but ultimately it's the people that cast the ballot that make the decision.
Yeah.
And so the demographic for Republicans have much, as I understand it, historically higher voter turnout in general. They will be there.
Yep.
And especially some of the far-right groups are now turning out their voters in very high percentages.
Yep.
So with the influence of this enormous amount of money that's coming in the post-Citizens United era, plus Republican, in my opinion, ongoing efforts toward voter suppression, have you run any more analyses that look at turnout versus demographics?
It's a very good question, and I will say this. Look, you know, if you're Mary Landrieu and you're running in Louisiana and you're trying to win in a state that's gone overwhelmingly for Republicans in the last few years, but you're a Democrat with a very well-known last name, you say, well, what I'm going to do is I just need to outperform the president did. But at the end of the day, even with a name like Mary Landrieu, even somebody who'd been there for 2 terms, she got 18% of the white vote, okay? This wasn't Barack Obama on the ballot. This was somebody who they knew and known differently. So there is something now to this idea that the difficulty that Democrats have getting white voters. And in a low turnout election or in a state where you don't have enough of a minority population to offset that, that's a problem. This is why the demographics work against Democrats for Congress, okay? You can win Ohio, but you win Ohio or Pennsylvania by turning out Philadelphia and Cleveland. That's how President Obama did it. In fact, he won fewer counties than any modern presidential nominee. He won fewer counties than Mike Dukakis, okay? And still won by a significant margin by turning up, and it's also our own, again, in-migration into the cities, et cetera, we don't need to go into that. But the bottom line is it's hard for Democrats to win outside of Whole Foods areas now. That's what makes it very tough if you're going to win a Senate race, if you're going to win a House race in a place that does not fit that demographic profile. At the same time, we also know, and this is what the Obama campaign, and I remember having these conversations with them over and over again, just about the march of history, okay, and demographics. So if you go back in the way back time machine, and you say, all right, in 1980, Ronald Reagan, thank you. I was like, what? All right, who was that? Ronald Reagan won, he won by 10 points, the popular vote by 10 points. He got 56% of the white vote, won by 10 points. Mitt Romney won 59% of the white vote and lost by 4 points, okay? At some point, it doesn't work. You're maximizing, and they do, Republican turnout more regularly. But if your voter if you're just gonna go for a white voter, you can get, and maybe you do, maybe you hit that point where you're gonna get 62% and you could still win. But again, that number is you're gonna have to get higher and higher and higher and higher on that number. And eventually it's just gonna be impossible. But this is why you have this, as I said, this real break between why the legislature looks so different, even though Democrats get more votes, they have fewer seats, why redistricting is going to be important in 2020, and why Republicans have to figure out how to win statewide, not just congressionally. Yeah.
Many people are talking about changing the Electoral College. There's
Yeah.
the National Popular Vote movement, which says that whoever wins nationally wins the election, no matter what the states say.
Mm-hmm.
There's another movement, I guess primarily by Republicans, saying that to have the Electoral College decide by congressional district as opposed by state. What do you see as the future for both of those movements?
Right, it's a good question. So yes, if you're a Republican in Ohio or Pennsylvania where there are like 5 Democrats left, you love this idea of doing it by congressional district. But that's not going to go anywhere. In part, there are a lot of Republicans who don't like that because what they fear is it's going to actually increase turnout if you're in a competitive seat, it's going to increase turnout in your competitive Republican seat, which could be a problem for you politically, right? But I don't think that's going anywhere. As for the Electoral College, what's, again, for the dorky of us in this room, and let's face it, we're all super dorky that we're here on a beautiful Saturday talking about this. But just go to the 270.com. I don't work for them. I know I've been mentioning them a lot, but and go through and go click through the electoral maps throughout history. And it's so fun to see how much it has changed, even just in 20 years, right? This idea that, like, if you had said to any of us in the room in 1992 that Republicans were going to dominate West Virginia, we'd be like, that is never going to happen. That's crazy. You know, when I started in politics in 1992, California was competitive, New Jersey was competitive. Nobody would have thought about a Democrat going to North Carolina or Virginia, right? So it does change over time, and a lot of this is based on both where people are moving to, which, again, the Northeast and the Midwest are going to lose more seats, and they're losing more population. Texas, North Carolina, Georgia, Arizona, those are going to be the new centers, both for population growth, but also for demographic change and electoral college change. And ultimately, I think that is what we're going to see. I think the only way that we change the electoral system is if we have something where you have an electoral college lock, right? I mean, this is what the political journalist in me dreams about, because it would be an awesome story, right? Like, deadlocked political electoral college. It goes to the House. They decide who the president's going to be. They're like bribes. People are dying mysteriously. There's going to be like so much awesomeness. The lobbying, the like, what happened to Congressman so-and-so? We can't find his body, right? Like, you know that's going to happen. It would be fantastic. Like, I love that idea from that perspective. From is it good for democracy? Absolutely not. Like, it would tear this country apart. Something like that happening, then you could see having a whole debate about the Electoral College, getting rid of it. Until then, we're just going to keep going along. And it's just ultimately, it's not really that fair if we just go to a system, and I do feel bad for you, California, I do, that nobody's paying attention to you. You're humongous, you have lots of people, you have a lot to say, you should have a voice. I totally understand that. At the same time, you know, and I love the people of Iowa, they have too much of a say, okay? I love them, I love the, you know, I learned what a corn thing is. See, I can't even say it. I understand now about all of that, but too much of a say. But there is somewhere in the middle that now, as a Virginian, a state that nobody had paid attention to, now we're sort of part of the mix, and North Carolina's now part of the mix, and Georgia soon is going to be part of the mix, and that these smaller states get a say, and it doesn't just become about Texas, New York, California being the place where you're going to decide. So it is a balance. It's not perfect. Somehow it works. Katie Merrill, do you have a question? I do. Oh no. Make it really easy.
Okay. Ready?
Yes.
So I love the idea of the Martin Van Buren challenge to Hillary Clinton that she faces. But so, as a Hillary Clinton partisan, here's my concern, because Martin Van Buren
he had really
served
bad
one term.
Yeah, well, there's that.
And I'm worried about, should she overcome the Martin Van Buren challenge? Can she get a fourth term?
Oh, my God.
Has that ever happened in history? Probably not. I don't know. Mulholland, do you know? And
that's a really good question.
So
right.
So
we keep going back to Franklin Roosevelt.
Right. So what does that do to her and her legacy, and also the legacy of other women who then want to be elected president? Because it's all about, right? You only have a successful presidency if you're elected twice.
Oh.
So can you just talk about that a little bit?
Oh, wow. Right. So that is a very good question. And it is true, you think, no matter how well she does, it will be really tough, right? To have 4 terms for one party. That said, I do recall in 1991, nobody wanted to run against George H.W. Bush because nobody thought they were going to win. And all of those big names took themselves out, and it was like, he's going to win. He has 90% job approval. It's impossible. So there is always, it's now we look back and say it was obvious he was going to lose because we know nobody can be a 4-term no party can be in office for 4 terms in a row. Didn't turn out that way. All that said, I think the conundrum for Hillary Clinton is where she represents females and where she represents the party and how that all gets intertwined. I would hope that we're not going to look at Hillary Clinton, win or lose, and say, well, I guess we can't have any more women in the same way that we would say that about anybody else running. The fact is, I think what is tougher especially for Democrats right now, is the fact that there are no women governors. There's only one from New Hampshire. And I think the best way for women to make it through in terms of being seen as the next tier, I mean, Senate is important, and there are plenty of women in the Senate who will be considered, both either as vice presidential or presidential DNR. But I think if you were going to say where that next generation of potential women presidents come from, it has to be from the gubernatorial ranks. And that is something that if I were Democrats, I would be spending as much time on as anything, is getting them into those positions where they're seen as executives rather than legislators. And that's the other problem, too, with being part of Washington. I mean, you know, I lived there, and I even hate myself for living there. You know, America hates everything that Washington is about. And so being part of the Senate, I think, is going to be, is not necessarily going to help women as much as being a voice on a more executive stage. Yeah, the woman right there. Yeah, you guys can go.
Yes. Oftentimes when you have things as divided as they are today and as uncertain in the country, certain overriding issues emerge and become the focal point of the election. Do you see any overriding issues, whether international, national?
Yeah. Of course, we always know that whatever we think it's going to be, then something happens and that we never could predict, right? So I don't know what's going to happen internationally between ISIS and Iran and the Middle East, and there's just a whole panoply of issues out there that we don't know. But I do know this, that, and look, I've been saying this since 2014. It's now become sort of this mantra from both sides, is the idea of that economic inequality, wage gap, wage stagnation is a real serious concern. I think the overriding issue, though, is a sense of just anxiety, I would argue. Really a sense that there's no center, like it's not holding, that things seem to be just falling apart all over the place, and we can't really understand, nobody's making sense of it, and nobody seems to be in charge. Yeah, it's a leadership thing, and it's, I took this away from a focus group I sat in on during the last election. And it was a group of women voters. I think we were in Arkansas, and she summed it up, I think, brilliantly. She said, you know, the sad news is becoming familiar. That just is becoming a way of life, right? And where these women were concerned about, what they connected together in a way that I hadn't heard anybody else do, was this was right at the height of the ISIS stuff happening. But what they connected, and they were worried, I mean, they raised it themselves about like, who are these people and why are they chopping off heads, and I don't understand this. But they connected that to Ferguson, to school shootings, to the economy, okay? It all to them said the same thing, which is, and they all came back to this, I'm really worried about my kids. I'm worried about putting them on the school bus. I'm worried about them going to college. I'm worried about the fact that their school isn't up to par. I'm worried about letting them go out with friends for their safety. You know, all these different things, and it really came to that piece. And so that is what I think whoever this next successful presidential candidate is going to find a way to talk about those things and address them, and also make people feel like if there's not an answer, there's at least going to be a way to ease this anxiety. And doing it, however, in a way that's optimistic, right? I think if you look at the campaign of Mitt Romney in 2012, it was all about Barack Obama's terrible, the world's going to end, he's horrible, bad, 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 bad. And everyone's like, that's true, but like, great, okay, but what are you going to do about it? What does that mean other than things are bad? Like, who are you and how are you going to make that better for me? Somebody said that on one of the panels too, the disconnect really between what we're talking about here and what voters are hearing, which is, that's fine, blah, 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 tell me your positions, blah, 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 blah. How does that connect to me? Nobody's connecting to me and what this matters. The number one thing that there's, and I sat in a lot of these focus groups, mostly of women voters, but who would say over and over again, like, I want them to come to my house for a week. I want every one of these candidates to come sit in my house for a week and see what it takes for me every day, get my kids to school, do my job, commute, figure out how I'm going to get dinner on the table, figure out how I'm going to get the prom dress that I can't afford. I want you to see what that's like. And they think that politicians across the board, that they are fat cats. A number of them said, I don't think they pump their own gas. I don't think they know what it is like to go into a grocery store and have coupons or even know what a grocery store is, right? Like, they don't go to a grocery store. They have people cook them food at all hours because they're billionaires, right? So that disconnect is really significant. And that's why when you see some of these candidates, their ability to be able to connect at that level is going to be very important. I think, as I said, just in my dealings with some of these candidates, I think Marco Rubio of the Republicans does that in a very compelling way. Yeah. Do you want to go? Mr. Truman? Yeah.
What impact, if any, do you see possible independent candidates like Bernie Sanders of Vermont or third-party candidates like Jill Stein of the Greens or Gary Johnson of the Libertarians running again?
Yeah. I mean, what's funny is we're at this point where people say they hate the parties more than ever, right? We're so polarized. We have a record number of voters now who identify themselves as independent. So it would seem like it'd be ripe for an independent candidate, right? People are independent, they hate the parties. But there was a great paper that I read I guess this was last year, and it's been codified by a lot of other data out there, that just because somebody calls themselves independent doesn't mean that they're really independent, okay? It means that they don't currently like the party for a variety of reasons. Now, we hear independent, I think, in political journalism, and we go, oh, moderate, right? Oh, they think that this party's too left and this party's too right. No. If you break down, you'd say to those 43%, okay, and Pew did this, all right, 43% you say you're independent, okay. Now I'm going to ask you which way you lean, all right? Only 10% were left that are pure, like 10 to 15% that are like pure, no, I'm really, truly, I don't lean this way or that way. But then you find out of those people who do lean but are in that independent category, they think that the Republican Party is too soft, is too moderate, right? They've lost their way, they're not conservative enough, and the Democrats who have left don't think the Democrats are liberal enough, right? So that's very different than saying we need a moderate, middle-of-the-road, third-party candidate who's going to come and bring that 43% to turn out and vote. But so I think that is an important thing to remember when we're talking about who independents are and how they actually go about and vote. The second piece of this, and it goes back to the Electoral College math problem, which it becomes impossible to win at the Electoral College. So you have to resign yourself to being a spoiler. And that is something that a lot of folks don't particularly want to be. Michael Bloomberg, who was taking it very seriously, when he talked to people around him about the conversations that they had with him about this, he wanted a path to victory. He wanted a path to 270. He did not want to be like, well, you could win here and a little bit there and maybe get 50 electoral votes. Well, that's no fun. So when we have a two-party system, and we have an electoral college system that benefits a two-party system. And until that changes, I just don't know that you're going to see much of a third-party candidate in terms of their electoral success. Where they do make a difference is injecting, whether it's an issue or whether it's an agenda, into the debate. So, Ross Perot made the deficit sexy, or whatever. Ross Perot and sexy together is kind of creepy to think about, but, right? People started talking about it. Bill Clinton talked about it, right? It moved the Democrats on this issue, and it moved Republicans on this issue as well. He wasn't going anywhere, although let's remember he was. In June of 1992, the guy was in first place in the polls, but before we had the implosion and the "you're spying on my daughter" and all that stuff. But I think injecting issues into debate is important, and that's where I think you're really going to see, if there's an influence of a third party, that's where it will be. Okay, yeah, you want to go right here?
In your rundown of Republican potential candidates, and you're separating into camps of those who might be able to break the demographic barrier and those who have no chance, you didn't mention Rand Paul.
Oh,
and,
yeah.
I find him kind of a...
I do, sorry. I should have mentioned Rand Paul. I thank you. I knew I was going to forget somebody. He was in my notes and I forgot him. All right, so Rand Paul he is out there right now actively saying, I'm going to break this. He's not just trying to subtly say it. He's saying, I am talking to young people. He was here, right? Was anybody at the Rand Paul speech? Okay, I don't know the last time a Republican willingly came to Berkeley and talked to people, right? So you got that. He's going into African-American neighborhoods and communities and talking and working with African-American legislators. He's talking about issues that aren't particularly sexy to Republican primary voters, like sentencing reform, but sure has an appeal outside of that traditional vote. I'm glad you used the word interesting, because I think an intriguing, that's what we all say. I think a lot of political reporters too. We like him because he's intriguing, he's different, he's challenging the orthodoxy, not just on some of those issues, but certainly on foreign policy. And yet, intriguing is also another word for not electable, okay? And you can be really intriguing, but you also have to be able to get your base to vote for you. So besides the fact that there is going to be, I have no doubt, a concerted effort, if he does get traction, from especially the hawkish wing of the party to go after him on his views on foreign policy, he's also going to have to defend his voting record and his statements and his past association with his dad, and do that in a way that is better than he's done so far. I think he has pretty thin skin. I don't know that he wears very well once he gets pushed. And look, the guy's been able to take a whole lot of positions on the same issue, or nuance a little here, nuance a little there. What I'm really curious to see is once he's called on that, you to me, direct question, yes or no, what are you going to do about this? Or on a panel with other Republican candidates, you said this, now you're saying that? Who are you? Your dad did this? How are you going to explain that? You were with your dad when he did this? That is going to be, I think, the bigger challenge for him. So I think he does intrigue. I think he has a base. Again, the libertarian part of the Republican Party is real, and he's the only guy in that field, unlike the others who have to compete for the establishment, have to compete for the evangelical, have to compete for Tea Party. He's got the libertarian all to himself, so that's a nice chunk of the vote. But where he grows from that, I don't quite know yet. I don't see him doing that yet. All right. Well, thank you very much. I didn't answer your question.
Thank you, Amy. I have to say, not only is Rand Paul intriguing, that was an intriguing rundown on 2016. We'll replay the tape in 2 years and see how she did. We're going to take a 15-minute break and come back and talk about turnout. Thank you, Amy.